Hi guys, today we will be looking at Hamlet Act 5, Scene 1 and 2. This will include the summary of the scenes as well as a look at the characters. In the description, I have linked to an audiobook of Hamlet, which can be accessed for free at the moment from Audible. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications down below. In the churchyard, two grave diggers shovel out a grave for Ophelia. They argue whether Ophelia should be buried in the churchyard, since her death looks like a suicide. According to religious doctrine, suicides may not receive Christian burial. Hamlet and Horatio enter at a distance and watch the grave diggers work. Hamlet looks with wonder at the skulls they excavate to make room for the fresh graves and speculates darkly about what occupations the owners of these skulls served in life. Hamlet asks the gravedigger whose grave he digs, and the gravedigger spars with him verbally, first claiming that the grave is his own, since he is digging it, and then that the grave belongs to no man or woman, because men and women are living things, and the occupant of the grave will be dead. At last he admits that it belongs to one that was a woman, sir, but rest her soul, she is dead. The gravedigger, who does not recognize Hamlet as the prince, tells him that he has been a gravedigger since King Hamlet defeated the elder Fortinbras in battle, the very day on which Prince Hamlet was born. Hamlet picks up a skull, and the gravedigger tells him that the skull belonged to Yorick, King Hamlet's jester. Hamlet tells Horatio that as a child he knew Yorick and is appalled at the sight of the skull. He realizes forcefully that all men will eventually become dust, even great men like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. Hamlet imagines that Julius Caesar has disintegrated and is now part of the dust used to patch up a wall. Suddenly, the funeral procession for Ophelia enters the churchyard, including Claudius, Gertrude, Laertes, and many mourning courtiers. Hamlet, wondering who has died, notices that the funeral rites seem maimed, indicating that the dead man or woman took his or her own life. As Ophelia is laid in the earth, Hamlet realizes that it is she who has died. At the same moment, Laertes becomes infuriated by the priest, who says that to give Ophelia a proper Christian burial would profane the dead. Laertes leaps into Ophelia's grave to hold her once again in his arms. Grief-stricken and outraged, Hamlet bursts upon the company. Declaring in agonized fury his own love for Ophelia, he leaps into the grave and fights with Laertes. Hamlet cries that he would do things for Ophelia that Laertes would not dream of. He would eat a crocodile for her or be buried alive with her. The combatants are pulled apart by the funeral company. Gertrude and Claudius declare that Hamlet is mad, and Hamlet storms off and Horatio follows. The king urges Laertes to be patient and to remember their plan for revenge. The grave diggers are designated as clowns in the stage directions and prompts, and it is important to note that in Shakespeare's time the word clown referred to a rustic or peasant and did not mean that the person in question was funny or wore a costume. Though they are usually figures of merriment, in this scene the grave diggers assume a rather macabre tone, since their jests and jibes are all made in a cemetery among bones of the dead. Hamlet's confrontation with death, manifested primarily in his discovery of Yorick's skull, is like Ophelia's drowning, an enduring image from the play. However, this solemn theorizing explodes in grief and rage when he sees Ophelia's funeral procession, and his assault on Laertes offers a glimpse of what his true feelings for Ophelia might have been. Interestingly, Hamlet never expresses a sense of guilt over Ophelia's death, which he indirectly caused through the murder of Polonius. In fact, the only time he even comes close to taking responsibility for Polonius's death at all comes in the next and last scene, when he apologizes to Laertes before the duel, blaming his madness for Polonius's death. A notable minor motif that is developed in this scene is Hamlet's obsession with the physicality of death. Though many of his thoughts about death concern the spiritual consequences of dying, for instance, the torment in the afterlife, he is nearly as fascinated by the physical decomposition of the body. This is nowhere more evident than in his preoccupation with Yorick's skull, when he envisions physical features such as lips and skin that have decomposed from the bone. Recall that Hamlet previously commented to Claudius that Polonius's body was at supper because it was being eaten by worms. Also fascinated by the equalizing effect of death and decomposition. Great men and beggars both end as dust. In this scene, he imagines dust from the decomposed corpse of Julius Caesar being used to patch a wall. The next day at Elsinore Castle, Hamlet tells Horatio how he plotted to overcome Claudius's scheme to have him murdered in England. He replaced the sealed letter carried by the unsuspecting Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which called for Hamlet's execution, with one calling for the execution of the bearers of the letter, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern themselves. The conversation is interrupted by Osric, a foolish courtier. Osric tries to flatter Hamlet by agreeing with everything Hamlet says, even when he contradicts himself, in the space of seconds. He agrees first that it is cold, then that it is hot. He has come to tell them that Claudius wants Hamlet to fence with Laertes, and that the king has made a wager with Laertes that Hamlet will win. The court marches into the hall, and Hamlet asks Laertes for forgiveness, claiming that it was his madness and not his own will that murdered Polonius. Laertes says that he will not forgive Hamlet until an elder, an expert in the fine points of honor, has advised him in the matter, but in the meantime, he says, he will accept Hamlet's offer of love. They select their foils, blunted swords used in fencing, and the king says that if Hamlet wins the first or second hit, he will drink to Hamlet's health, then throw into the cup a valuable gem, which is actually the poison, and give the wine to Hamlet. The duel begins, and Hamlet strikes Laertes, but declines to drink from the cup, saying that he will play another hit first. Hamlet hits Laertes again, and Gertrude rises to drink from the cup. The king tells her not to, but she does so anyway. In an aside, Claudius murmurs, "It is the poisoned cup, it is too late." Laertes then remarks under his breath that to wound Hamlet with the poisoned sword is almost against his conscience, but they fight again, and Laertes scores a hit against Hamlet, drawing blood. Scuffling, they manage to exchange swords, and Hamlet wounds Laertes with Laertes' own blade. The queen then falls, and Laertes, poisoned by his own sword, declares, "I'm justly killed with my own treachery." The queen moans that the cup must have been poisoned, and calls out to Hamlet, and then dies. Laertes tells Hamlet that he, too, has been slain by his own poisoned sword, and that the king is to blame both for the poison on the sword and for the poison in the cup. Hamlet, in a fury, runs Claudius through with the poisoned sword and forces him to drink down the rest of the poison wine. Claudius dies, crying out for help. Hamlet tells Horatio that he is dying and exchanges a last forgiveness with Laertes, who dies after absolving Hamlet. He tells Horatio again that he is dying and urges his friend not to commit suicide in light of all the tragedies, but instead to stay alive and tell his story. He says that he wishes Fortinbras to be made king of Denmark, then he dies. Horatio says that he will tell everyone assembled the story that led to the gruesome scene now on display. Fortinbras orders for Hamlet to be carried away like a soldier. Hamlet previously was obsessed almost wholly with himself and his family, He is now able to think sympathetically about others. He does not go quite so far as to take responsibility for Polonius's death, but he does seem to be acting with a broader perspective after the shock of Ophelia's death. The arrival of Fortinbras effectively poses the question of political legitimacy once again. In the marked contrast to the corrupted and weakened royal family lying on the dead floor, Fortinbras clearly represents a strong-willed, capable leader. Thank you for listening to today's lesson. I hope that you learnt a lot. Please make sure to like and subscribe and check the description box for any extra resources. Thanks. Bye.